Good afternoon, and it's very heartening to see the hall half filled at 4 o'clock on the ultimate day, but it's always wonderful to be at any session at this grand marquee festival of literature and ideas. I'm actually delighted to be here to discuss Delhi's Djinns, because Delhi to me is dazzling, disbelieving, dysfunctional, and destructive, and chaotic all the time, with always there is a conflict at the core of Delhi, and it's always in flux, but it is always rebuilding itself. And today I'm with these two wonderful historians who are ardent and meticulous researchers and chroniclers of a city which they have seen through different lens. And Swapna looks at Delhi from many angles, and the one which we are particularly interested in is a time that she sees, which is a time of great flux in Delhi. And Eric, as you know, has relived his memories of Delhi from the legends and urban myths which surround the many, many monuments of this vast, not this, but the city of Delhi, the vast city. I sometimes forget we are in Jaipur when we talk about Delhi. Swapna, if I were to begin with you, why did you choose this for the broken script? You chose this period which was full of so much of flux and so much of conflict, and yet at the same time, a time of rebuilding, because there was an educational efflorescence at that time, and yet the British were in this conniving, scheming way trying to wrest control from the Mughals, and it was sort of, it was one flowing into the other. So if you can give us a little thought on that.
First of all, thank you, Arundhati, for doing this, and of course the Jaipur Literature Festival, the organizers. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I'm so grateful and glad to do this. I feel that partly these things are personal. I'm very familiar with the 19th century, I'm familiar with Delhi, I've already written books on Delhi, etc. So Delhi is always the default, it'll happen. But also I found this era very interesting, because this is a period where there's a lot of, there was, before I wrote this book, I realized that there was a lot of popular writing, particularly in Urdu, but it's all in cliches.
Yeah.
It is about, the twilight of the Mughals, and about Renaissance in Delhi. And, it's all these tropes that come up, and they are really stereotypes.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know what exactly happened at this time. And then I did a PhD on this also.
Yes, your book is absolutely spellbinding in the way you have detailed it.
Yeah, then I wrote it as a journal. But it is an interesting period, because this is a period where the East India Company is taking over, it's taken over Delhi.
Yes.
It keeps the Mughal emperor on as a puppet, but it rules in real terms. It is the de facto ruler, and it is also a period where there's a whole lot of change happening. So this was something that really interested me. There are so many layers in Delhi's history, and there's so much to unpack. And I thought that this was one period which was not talked about quite so much. So,
in fact, if I may say this, I was very, very alarmed when you spoke about how we all know about this, but how the East India Company connivingly and very schemingly wrested control. And I give you an example. Archibald Seton sent so many gifts to the emperor while they were trying to devalue the entire system. As you know, the Mughals set a lot of store in ceremonial seals, and the whole idea of seals was a very important ceremony of the entire system. So in that way, when they sent their first letter, Governor General's letter, actually didn't have the newly ascended Akbar's seal, but used the former emperor's seal. Why do you think, how did they do this, and how connivingly did they proceed? If you can throw some light, it's a fascinating discussion.
So one thing very simple was that they wanted, the British wanted to rule India, of course, and they realized that they have to rule, at least initially, the best way to rule India is to hide behind the Mughal emperor. Hide behind the Mughal emperor, but at the same time try to show that though they are trying to take the Mughal emperor's name and the Mughal emperor's courtly practices, etc., but also to show that we are not really taking orders from him. So that's a very complicated thing, You can say that we acknowledge you as the ruler, but we are not ruled by you.
Yeah.
You are ruling everybody, and we are getting the benefit of that, but we are not being ruled by you. So that's the thing, really.
Yeah, it is. I think the art of connivance was at its peak at this with the East India Company. Eric, I've come to you because your great love for Jamali, which you've spoken to me as a confidant and colleague many times, and you think of him as a Renaissance man, you think of him as a future trustee of the Gymkhana Club. So tell me, why did Jamali hold such sway over you? What prompted, what inspired you to do that wonderful heritage walk that I did with you once? So can you throw some light on that?
Thank you, Arundhati, and thank you, Dr. Liddle. First of all, it's such a privilege to be in conversation, both of you, a fellow lover of Delhi and a fellow lover of ghosts, and also Delhi. The cover of my book has this monument, this gem box of a tomb in Delhi called Jamali-Kamali's tomb. Before I tell you about my fascination with it, I usually start with asking the audience, how many of you believe in ghosts, with just a show of hands? Okay. But how many of you have heard a ghost story while growing up? All of you. This was my inspiration because all of my work has been with people and stories that people tell me and the perceptions they have about history. Jamali-Kamali is this monument that is always kept locked. It is in the Mehrauli Archaeological Park, in the backyard of the Qutub Minar, one of the world's most visited monuments. And yet Jamali-Kamali is kept sort of secretly, hidden away. The first time when I visited it, I was lured by the lore of who Kamali is, because we do not know who Kamali was. We know Jamali was a Sufi, a poet, a globetrotter. Very interestingly, he was associated both with the Lodhis, so he was with Sikandar Lodhi. And then we know that he fell out of favor from the Lodhi court, but he was a poet. So he could sway his way, and he wrote poetry for Babur, and he became a part of the Mughal Empire. And he was a Dilli wala to the core. When Agra was being set up as a headquarter by the Mughals, Jamali was thinking about Delhi, because in the same year Babur throws this grand party in 1528 to officiate his rule of Hindustan. Jamali comes back to Delhi and commissions the work on his tomb. He gets buried with this man we know nothing about.
No, nothing about.
We call him Kamali because, well, it's the same way it rolls off our tongue, Jantar Mantar, Jamali-Kamali. For a very long time, people were curious as to who Kamali was, and it's still a curiosity. They say, he could be his disciple. Some say he was another poet. In hush ways, some say that he could be his lover, but it's very difficult for people to accept love nowadays. However, when I went on my various, wanderings with heritage walks with people, there are these foolwalas who sit outside, these flower sellers. And they told me, I was entering one evening, they said, आप अपने बाल बांध के जाइए, just tie your hair. And are you wearing itra, are you wearing perfume, take it off. I'm like, how do you take off perfume? I do not know. And I will, I did not know how to tie my hair because my tie is long but not long enough to be tied. So I went in and I was told that if you do not tie your hair and if you do not take off your perfume, then jinn, these entities made of smokeless fire, will come and start living in your hair. And that began my curiosity of the otherworldly aspect of Jamali-Kamali, which, well, makes it Delhi's most haunted monument. But as we will discover in this conversation, each monument is most haunted.
But that actually brings me to the question, because you talk about the good jinn of Mehrauli, and you went to the shrine of Qutub Sahib, and you say that the jinn over there, the fabric of Mehroli's jinn, are essentially good. So how would you define that, and why do you say that?
So the idea of the jinn is that, much like humans, these entities made of smokeless fire can choose to be good or bad. And so Delhi, which is known as the Bytes Khwaja ki Chaukat, the threshold of the 22 saints, if you go to a Sufi dargah, they will always tell you that Delhi is incomplete without its Sufis and its jinn. Jinn are a part of the lore at Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia's dargah and in Delhi's oldest dargah, which is that of Qutub Sahib or Qutubuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki in Mehrauli. Very interestingly, this tradition is sort of waning, but for a very long time, Phool Walo Ki Sair, this procession of florists would happen. They would come from Chandni Chowk, from Old Delhi, and they would give pankhas of flowers to the Yogmaya temple, which is in Mehrauli, and to Qutub Sahib's Dargah. Now, I went to the Dargah of Qutubuddin Bakhtiar Kaki, and while I was speaking to one of the attendants, they said to me, because I asked them, I said, Jamali-Kamali is just here, so do the jinn ever come this side? So then they said, even if they come, it doesn't matter, because the jinn in Mehrauli are good jinn. And then I wondered why. And they said, look at the name Mehrauli, Meherewali, the one that is protected by the saints' blessings. So if you are in a place that is blessed by the saints, how can the jinn be bad in that sense? Though, if you go to Jamali-Kamali, they say that the jinn will slap you. So I don't know how good they are.
They probably both. They probably coexist. Just like us in humans, the good and the bad exist together. There can be no good jinn without that I saw even when I was researching on ghosts. There are always two sides of the ghost. In fact, while we talk about Delhi's checkered history and all that has happened in the past, can we talk about, Swapna, about the cultural crossover that you talk about in the 19th century, which for me, the racial intermingling and the creation of the white Mughal, for me was more an idea of cultural control and appropriation than cultural intermingling. If you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, definitely. But I just want to do a little small detour because of something that, you were talking about Maulana Jamali's tomb. Now, that tomb remains locked, which is a great pity, and I can understand why they keep it locked. It's exquisite.
It's an
exquisitely
tomb.
designed. But I find one aspect of it very interesting, and it is something that people don't understand enough. For those who are not familiar with, say, a lot of the monuments of Delhi, if you look at many mosques and tombs, etc., have the Kalash motif. Now, a Kalash, you'll see carved into temple pillars, etc. But this was something that was part of a common tradition, a syncretic, I won't call it syncretic, it's a common evolving tradition of architecture. So it gets incorporated into tombs and mosques as well. Now, in this particular tomb, in the western wall, there is a mihrab, as usual, which kind of indicates the direction of Mecca. So if you're facing that, you know that you're facing Mecca. So it's usually put in tombs so that somebody coming in and saying a Fatiha for the person who's buried there will be facing Mecca. Now, in that mihrab is a Kalash. You can see that it's beautifully carved Kalash, very realistic Kalash with the leaves and a coconut and all of that is there. And in the middle of it is carved Allah. That is the spirit,
that is the spirit, yes,
that I see in Maulana Jamali's tomb.
Mm.
And that's a Sufi tradition that is there. Maulana Jamali is also a Sufi. So, that is the spirit that is there. And another one, I'm sorry, I'm going to
please,
go
please.
totally off the 19th century and talk about this. Sorry,
not.
this is 19th century. Let me come back to the Phool Walo Ki Sair, which is a 19th century syncretic, again, tradition, because it was the British had exiled the son of Akbar II.
Akbar II, yes.
Jahangir, he had been exiled to Allahabad after a fracas, which I don't want to go into, very complicated. But his mother then made a vow that she would, if he came back, she would offer a chadar at the Dargah of Qutub Bakhtiar Kaki. She asked the Phoolwalas to make a chadar of flowers. And that coverlet of flowers, the Phoolwalas then added pankhas to it. And every year, and it's an unbroken tradition,
yes,
more or less
continues.
unbroken. It goes on till now,
it
which is that the chadar is offered at the Dargah of Bakhtiar Kaki, and the pankhas are offered in the nearby temple of Jogmaya. And that's been coming on all through.
Such a tradition of syncretism and sort of union, and yet, good, bad religion, everything comes together.
And to get back finally to your question, I think, so this is something that I have an argument with William about, the white Mughal theory.
Yeah, that's why I asked you that.
Which is that I really feel that William in white Mughal tended to I think romanticize, and some of these are romantic stories, I'm sure, but also there are some which are gender relations are not without power.
No, they're
A
not.
lot of them are power. We cannot ignore that element of it.
And there's a tragedy swirling around these relationships.
Yes, some of these, the tragedy that, and some of these were where women were literally these were political alliances, and women were, nobody asked the women what they wanted. But also, some of these are tragic stories. One is that of James Skinner.
James Skinner, yeah.
James Skinner is this guy who actually is the founder of Skinner's Horse, which is still a regiment in the Indian Army. Right? I think it's called the first horse now, or something like that. Yeah. So his father was a British soldier, and when Banaras was, in Banaras, the East India Company had some sort of military engagement with the local zamindar. And during that, and this is something that James Skinner's biographer, James Fraser, wrote this. He said that during this military engagement, a 14-year-old girl fell into the hands of this soldier, which is James's father. Now, what does falling into somebody's hands, right?
It's brutal.
And he treated her well, and she bore him 6 children. Now, treated her well is a very sort of like, it's something that you can, it's doubtful, because when James was 12 years old, she committed suicide. And she killed herself because her daughters were forcibly taken away from her and sent to boarding school. I mean, it's a cultural shock to her. This girl has totally without her consent
been
taken away, and in a situation that's completely, today we would find it totally unacceptable. And these are power stories.
No, these are stories of power, and talking about power, of course, the curse of the saint, that power which actually lends to the haunted element of Delhi. I don't know how many of you actually have seen the citadel, the ruins of Tughlaqabad Fort over here in Delhi's Tughlaqabad. It's one of the most haunting and one of the most fascinating tombs and citadels and ramparts that exist in Delhi. I used to visit it for many times because my mother was a history teacher, and it fascinated her, to see this entire fortification. But it has a very, very cursed history around it, and which you've spoken about in your 14 walks. And because if you could tell us why a saint's curse and what that meant in the concept of legend and law, and how it did come true in the case of Tughlaqabad. And that would, Swapna, if you could talk about.
Eric going to talk about Tughlaqabad or me? Okay.
Start, and then he can.
Okay. So there's this, there are various legends around Tughlaqabad. Tughlaqabad, it happens at a time when this very strong emperor, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, wants to build a fort. And he wants to build this fortified city in a hurry because he's afraid that the Mongols will attack, and he needs a strong place. So he diverts and orders every workman to come and work over there. And of course, what happens is that workmen come, and at the same time, the Sufi, and the Sufis are often in this era at loggerheads with the rulers, because there's a sort of tussle between their important influence, centers of influence. So therefore, rulers are often jealous of the Sufis, and the Sufi is exerting his power also. So he was having a stepwell built, a Bauli. And Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq said that this has to be stopped because you are diverting important labor into your project. Well, I want everybody to be in my project. And basically, it is said that Nizamuddin defies him, curses the fort, and says that Ya base Gujar, Ya rahe Ujad, which means either Gujars will live here or it will be abandoned. And of course,
it is abandoned. It's a wild, abandoned fort.
Yes, and so that was the whole idea behind that. That was his curse. But also at the same time, Ghiyasuddin said that no, when I come back to Delhi, because he was out on a campaign, when I come back to Delhi, I'm going to punish this guy. And Nizamuddin said, Hanos Dilli Duras, Abhi Dilli Dur hai. You are outside, And what happened was that Ghiyasuddin never got back to Delhi because he
died.
Died in an accident. And of course, what happened was that also these are miraculous stories that are attributed.
So many stories swirling, Eric. It brings me to one of the most violent stories that you speak about, the Khooni Darwaza, the legend and the myth around Khooni Darwaza, the bloody tale of gore, the idea that you've spread about Dara Shukho's severed head served to Shah Jahan on a platter of food. and then of the public hanging of Rahim's sons. But none of this actually has historical evidence in real terms. So how do you talk about this Khooni Darwaza? How do you define the swirling myth? And how do you talk about the haunted part of this?
Well, to take it from what Dr. Liddle was saying, these are stories, some of these stories of the curses that we hear of. When a Sufi curses a sultan, like we see in the case of Tughlaqabad, we see that in many ways it is quite astonishing that till today it is this abandoned space. And the Tughlaqs seem to be in many ways associated with the otherworldly. When you think about Muhammad bin Tughlaq, he leaves Delhi barren, he moves the capital, and when they come back and Firoz Shah Tughlaq has to resettle, Firoz Shah Tughlaq is now Delhi's perhaps most haunted sultan, because everything that he left behind.
His legacy of haunting.
Exactly. From the Firoz Shah Kotla, which if you're a Delhi wala, when you say Firoz Shah Kotla, people think of the cricket stadium. But the cricket stadium was named after this, because obviously this came before. Now that stadium is called Arun Jaitley Stadium, actually. So there is that legacy of these stories. As far as the Khooni Darwaza is concerned, right in front of the Firoz Shah Kotla is this, for me, a rather unassuming gate. For a long time, this gate was also given all sorts of names. Kabuli Darwaza, which was wrong. Lal Darwaza is actually the name that we stick with as historians. But it's called Khooni Darwaza because of the range of gory stories associated with it. And it was for me so amusing how these figures from history, very prominent figures from history. How many of you have heard of Abdur Rahim, Rahim ke Dohe? While, listening to those, especially for Indian students. Dara Shukho and Aurangzeb. How many of you know of those two figures? And then finally, we have Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor. Now, all three of them find themselves tied at the Khooni Darwaza. The first story says that Rahim's sons, left nameless in this legend, were so, they offended Jahangir so much because of an incident that you'll find out when you read my book. They offended Jahangir so much that he hung them at this darwaza, and he made sure that people passing by could see what will happen if you go against me. Similarly, we go to the time of Aurangzeb and Dara Shukho. When Aurangzeb defeats Dara Shukho, his brother, who was supposed to be the emperor but couldn't, he was beheaded. We know that for a fact. There is no disputing this at all. But where did the head go is a mystery. Because every person who was writing at the time of Dara Shukho and Aurangzeb, they all had a version of their own. The Italians had a version of their own. The French had a version of their own. The court chroniclers, the ones who were on Aurangzeb's side, had a version of their own. So in one version in which you are referring to, it is Manushi, this Italian traveler, Venetian, who wanted to dramatize everything. So he wrote this very dramatic piece of, how the head of Dara was presented to Shah Jahan in Agra.
In prison.
Yes, on a platter. And Shah Jahan thought, food is coming for me, but he opens the platter and he's like, oh my God, that's my son. And so he breaks his teeth.
Horrifying.
Of course, it is horrifying. Now, why I got interested in this is because everybody kept saying all of these ghosts are here. There was actually a news documentary a few years ago which actually had these odd dramatic effects, Hitchcockian tunes, and people recording in black and white saying, "Ye dekho, yahan hai Dara Shukho ka bhoot." And I was like, oh my God, what is it about this ghost? And so I started to historically look at these stories, and I realized that a lot of these ghosts are existing there because of the political debates that we have about such figures. Dara Shukla and Aurangzeb
Yeah.
is a constantly
Conflict.
debated
Yeah.
topic on news channels, if we call them debates anymore. We see, roads being renamed, so much conversation on where is Dara's grave and how to raise Aurangzeb's grave. That is what happened.
But do we know where Dara's head is?
We do not either know where Dara's head is or where his grave
So if
is.
you see a severed head somewhere
Please
in
return
Delhi,
it to
talk to
Humayun's
Eric
tomb.
Chopra and add to his repository of myth. Now coming to another of haunted legacies, let's talk about Malcha Mahal, and both of you can add to this because I have actually personally taken a heritage walk with, or a haunted heritage walk with Eric, organized by Delhi Tourism down Malcha Mahal. It was dusk, falling dusk. It was one of those eerie times of twilight, and we saw a lot of monkeys and maybe a spirit or two. So if you can talk about why Malcha Mahal has this haunted quality about it, and I would request Swapna to also add to that because she has a lot of information on the underlying contours of this history. Yeah.
So when I was writing the book, Malcha Mahal was definitely the most interesting chapter to write because of how it was relevant among all these curious cats of Delhi. And it just so happened that in my process of writing, the Delhi Tourism Department announced that they're going to do haunted heritage walks. Very, interestingly, a few months before that, Dr. Liddle and I were having a conversation, and I was talking to her about conservation of this monument, and both of us had nothing much to say because no conservation really was happening. So when the haunted heritage walks began, you were like, oh, yeah, you should put all your resources in that. So when the story really takes place is that in the 1980s, a woman arrives at the New Delhi railway station, dramatically exoticized in these international newspapers as wearing, these silk saris, huge black sunglasses, hair flowing, with lots of dogs and 2 children who she called Prince Ali and Princess Sakina. And she says that I'm the heiress of the house of Lucknow. I go back to the time of Begum Hazrat Mahal and Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, and I need a house in Delhi. She demands this to Indira Gandhi. She stays put at the New Delhi railway station for 10 years. Finally, the government decides to allot her this abandoned hunting lodge in the middle of the Central Ridge Forest in Delhi, adjacent to a very premier part of the city, Chanakyapuri, and Malcha Mahal, which is a very premier part of the city. And she takes up on this offer. She starts living in this hunting lodge. It belonged to Firoz Shah Tughlaq, which is why I call him such a haunted sultan. And she stays here for years. The last person to stay was her son. The legend goes that she crushed diamonds and swallowed them, but there was a lot of exoticization of their story. The son passed away, and then the New York Times broke a report which sort of undid a lot of their story and talked about how partition was at the core of this. Once they died and passed away, this monument was left for the world. It was just
Unattended.
open. So people started going in, they started stealing stuff out of there. At that time, I think Dr. Liddle with Intact had written to them. And I would like to ask you, what was that
Yeah,
process like?
Tell us about how it is so important to conserve.
So, one thing that I always keep telling people is that heritage, when we talk about heritage and heritage protection, those of you who are in any positions of influence or want to take it up with the authorities or whatever, any monument in wherever you live, please remember that law is very important. When you ask governments to protect, law is very important. And we told this was one of those so-called unprotected monuments.
yeah,
I think there was no legal protection. And when you don't have legal protection, it's like literally it's an orphan building. Nobody takes up. So we immediately, I was, at that time, I was connected with INTAC, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, the Delhi chapter. And we wrote to the Delhi State Department of Archaeology saying, Delhi government, please adopt this, protect
And they did
it,
try,
etc.
right? They did try.
Yes, I don't know whether they are caught up in paperwork or whatever it is, but until, they actually go and take charge of it, notify it as protected, these things can disappear.
Absolutely.
Things can disappear if they are left in limbo like this. So those things become, and this is a very unromantic part of this whole story, but law is very important. The enacting of law and proactive work.
In a way, when you're leaving a monument in this derelict condition, that is where, you know, the hauntings and the idea of the swirling ghosts around it happen. And as I was researching on my own book, I found the idea of geography, as we were discussing, the idea of spaces in geographies which are abandoned by history becomes the space for myth and legend, and that is what creates these urban myths. I mean, coming back to our sort of era that we were talking about, and this very dramatic, tumultuous era, let's talk about the tides of war, that May of 1857, which you've written about so eloquently, when the revolt happened, and the atmosphere, and what happened, and the ambience. If you could tell us about that.
Well, 1857 has its own ghosts, I think. I think one of the biggest ghosts is, actually, to be very frank, this is another William Dalrymple story, because
No, this is your story.
This is my story. No, he wrote about. I first met William when we were researching at the National Archives together on Delhi around 1857. But it's an interesting story, because one of the things that people forget is that how much 1857 in Delhi is about a class war. There is a class war that is happening in Delhi, which nobody has talked about. But the newspapers of the day, the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, for instance, it speaks about that. Because it's not about a sectarian divide in the city. Of course, the city is fighting against an external enemy, which is the East India Company. But within itself, the city is divided, because there are the laboring poor who have taken advantage of the disorders that are created because of 1857, the coming of mutinous soldiers and the uprising, the disintegration and the absolute collapse of the British administrative system during the revolt, to empower themselves. They loot the bank, they get money, they take the opportunity to loot their rich neighbors, the rich merchants of the city. What they do is they say, oh, so-and-so is hiding a European here. Some British official is hiding in that house, go look for him. And the soldiers come to look for him, and of course, they don't find anybody, but in the meanwhile, people have come in and looted. And this is what happens, is that these laboring poor then arm themselves, they become soldiers, they stop carrying out menial jobs. So, in fact, it's amazing that the failure of the revolt in 1857 in Delhi, the failure in Delhi, I'm not claiming that about the whole country, but in Delhi, a large part happens because it's the propertied classes, the merchants, whoever has any means is scared by this. They are so scared that this is what is happening over here. Yeah. They see this world being turned upside down. And they actually withdraw their support from the revolt because of this. And that's the failure of the revolt. It is a failure of a very almost a revolutionary social change that was on the anvil, but it fails.
That's a very, very fascinating way of looking at it.
So I looked at things like the poetry of that period to talk about this.
The efflorescence of the poetry and the education was also interesting, because it's a juxtaposition with what was happening in the time. And there was anarchy during that time, and yet there was mutiny, because there is a class conflict, as you've just said, which brings me to Eric's chapter on the Mutiny Memorial, where so few actually go. I don't know how many of you have gone to the Mutiny Memorial, which was completely at odds with India's cultural subconscious. When you look at it, it was made as an ode to the soldiers of the British Army who died in the mutiny. So it was, again, there was a change made, and there was some kind of a reform, and a new plaque was put. But you've gone there to see a ghost. So tell us about that, the ghost of the Angrez that you saw or didn't see.
You know, taking again from what Dr. Liddle said, when you imagine this moment, the uprising, I want you to really put yourself in the position. You are the last king of Delhi, Bahadur Shah Zafar, and you can see it's crumbling before you. It's all coming to an end. You are hiding in your great-great-great-grandfather's tomb, Humayun's tomb. You're perched against his marble grave with your wife. And the British are outside. Just one man and his assistant are outside. You're surrounded by thousands of supporters, but you know it's going to come to an end. All you ask as the last king of Delhi from Captain Hudson, in whose hands his fate lay, Izzat rakh lena, and just make sure that you give me the promise of life, that you don't kill me. They are taken back to what once was Shah Jahanabad. Imagine Shah Jahan's glistening city at the time when he built it, the capital of all capitals. They take him back. They put him in that room. He's put at trial in the same place where he was crowned yet again Shahenshah-e Hindustan at the beginning of the uprising. And as he is exiled to Rangoon, Myanmar, where he lays buried today, he sees on the way the great comet of 1857.
Yes,
Previously, comets had come and the Mughals had looked at them and said, you know, this will cause chaos. It had come in Akbar's time, but the chaos was in Persia. It had come in Jahangir's time, but the chaos was in Afghanistan. This time, the chaos was in Delhi. And Ghalib, the poet of Delhi, actually looked up and said, this means it's the death of a country. And it was the death of Delhi, because Delhi had become a prize, and there was a question on whether the British should even let it survive. They were wondering what should be the next capital, what should be the state of Delhi. It's all barren land, which is why Shahjahanabad, what we call Old Delhi today, became Old Delhi. As a Lutyens' Delhi, New Delhi started being made. It is after the exile of Zafar, the last king, all he wanted was to be buried in Delhi, much like Jamali, that the British decide to build this Gothic monument called the Mutiny Memorial. It's perched up on this hilly area of Delhi called the Northern Ridge. Delhi is surrounded by its ridge, and this part is where the North Campus, Delhi University is. So Delhi University kids go there often. And it's a triangle. There is an Ashokan pillar over there, which Firoz Shah Tughlaq had transported.
Where Latwale Baba is supposed to.
Latwale Baba is in Firozshah Kotla. This pillar is not that otherworldly, except it was broken into 5 pieces at one point and then pasted together. And today, if you go there, they tell you कि यहाँ पे आपको लोग दिखेंगे जो आगे से heaven की तरह दिखते हैं और पीछे से hell. But the Mutiny Memorial, this Gothic tower, is supposedly haunted by a headless British ghost who asks you for a cigarette. Now, if he's headless, how does he smoke? I have no clue. I have not seen him. But he's there.
He's there.
And to know more about this area, I suppose you'll have to read all of
all the books that are on offer. And I think coming to a close, and we open for questions, what is important here to remember that Delhi is a city of many myths and many legends and many historical facts, where sometimes fact and fiction coalesce and intersect, and we don't know what is real and what is not. There is the prophecy of the Sufi saint, there's the prophecy from astronomy and comet, and then there is the curse, and there is so much. I'd like Swapna to just give a line to end it, because this is where we need to conserve the monuments and not let it fall into the ruined hands of abandonment, as we are witnessing in so many other monuments in the city. So if you could just end with that, we'll open to questions right after.
So it's very simple. I don't believe in the supernatural, right?
Okay.
So I don't believe.
Then we'll have a debate later. Eric and I.
Yeah. So I don't believe in the supernatural. But let me tell you, whatever brings you to the monument, if it's a ghost walk that brings you, good luck.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that people would do ghost walks, because whatever brings you to the monument, whatever helps you to connect to the monument, that's what's important. So there we are.
Long live the ghostly legacy of Delhi, and long live Delhi. From whatever ruins we are in, it will emerge. And now we can open for questions. There's wonderful 2 historians who are here to answer all your enigmas about Delhi.
Just know I'm not a paranormal investigator, so don't ask me if I've seen a ghost.
Thank you so much for that session. The Mutiny Memorial that you were speaking of is currently vowed or is on the line to become perhaps a wedding venue or a venue under the new privatization thing that the Delhi government wants to do. Do you think a privatization move could help conserve the to be honest, almost ramshackle monuments of Delhi.
Let's Swapna take that.
So let me tell you, first of all, I think monuments should be places which are open to other things. Now, other things, event is a way to put it, but I'm thinking of whether it is a small musical gathering, or a small talk, or maybe a local artist's exhibition space. These would be things which would be compatible with the place and would not put a strain on the monument. The problem is that our imagination doesn't seem to go there. It's either it is locked up and out of bounds for everybody, or it becomes a shadi venue. We have
trying with Red Fort.
Or a big event. It doesn't have to be a big event. It should be a small. And Delhi has a paucity of event spaces, right? So something that for people who cannot afford a big venue, a small space, and it will give people a stake in the place.
I think people to give a sense of history is very important. I mean, Red Fort, they're trying now with so much that is culturally, enriching to the space. But yes, I completely agree that we need to find events which will speak to the cultural core of the city rather than given to these big weddings. But any other questions? Yeah.
Hello. I wanted to say that for the first time this year, Phoolon Wali Sair, get up. You want me to stand up? Oh, okay. I just want to say that for the first time this year in 2026, the Phoolon Wali Sair was banned, forbidden, or not allowed, whatever. And let's not get into that. But I also want to say that the history of Delhi prior to 1857, the powers that be are trying to obliterate that history. I just wonder why the Djinns are not uprising.
I think they probably will very soon. Look at the pollution. Look at Grab 4 already out as of yesterday.
The Djinns, it's very interesting because, as I said in the beginning, when you think of Delhi as a city protected by its saints, similarly, many believe that Djinn, for example, in Firoz Shah Kotla, are Djinn that you go and you seek, blessings from, and you make sure that if you are blessed, you invite them to your weddings and you leave letters for them. So this is an active practice in Delhi. Now they say that the Djinn in Firoz Shah Kotla, among other legends that exist, is that they came after they were expelled from 1857's Shahjahanabad, because Shahjahanabad was left barren. So there were no houses for them to inhabit. So local lore believes that they started moving this side and they started living in these spaces. I think that they are not rebelling in the way we would hope for them to, is because in many ways, if we believe in these legends, we need to realize that we are the inheritors of this city. It is our work and our power that should be confident enough to speak truth to power. And I think these Djinn are actually watching for us to speak truth to power and to say that this is a history of Delhi that you cannot take away from us, and its syncretic culture cannot be ever divorced from the spirit of the city.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Swapna. That was, so there's one last question.
So I'm from Calcutta, where there's a movie being made called Bhute Bhavishya, where ghosts discuss how they can apply for space because there are so many multi-story new buildings and there's no space. In your opinion, is there enough space for Djinns in Delhi?
I think there are many spaces. I think there are a lot of abandoned spaces in Delhi for Djinns, also not just abandoned. Maybe you can take that. Also because there are lots of uncertainties in Delhi right now.
Again, with the Djinn, because they do not take, we are going to the logistics of this because I have been a part of this for so long, so I'll logistically explain it. They don't require much space. They can fit in niches. And then Delhi is a city of niches. You will see them in all monuments. So you will see thousands. And if you think about, let's say, the Lodi's gardens, which is not haunted because there are so many people there, but there are many, many niches where the jinn can just live and come out of. So I think logistically speaking, even after partition, for example, the ghosts moved and migrated. According to my nani, who lived in a village, when I asked her, कि आपके पीपल के पेड़ में क्या है? So she very naturally said, jinn hai aur kya hai? And I got into the logistics, how you are a Hindu Punjabi, how are there jinn in your trees? Why is not there a bhutni in your tree? She's like, you're so silly to believe that religion can penetrate the other world. So I think there's enough space for everyone. It is in the real world that we need to make space for people, which is really shrinking and waning now.
I think in the netherworld and in the world of the supernatural, the divisions don't exist. And on that note, thank you very much for being such an engaged audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.